Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to Storyline Chapters. Today I want to tell you about a man who spent 27 years in prison but never lost hope. A man who could have chosen revenge and chose forgiveness instead. His name was Nelson Mandela. His story didn't just change one country, it changed the way the whole world thinks about justice, courage, and grace. If stories like this move you, please subscribe to the channel. Now let's travel back to South Africa, to a time when the color of your skin decided the entire shape of your life. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18th, 1918, in a small village called Mvezo in South Africa. His birth name was Rolihlahla, a name that's often translated as troublemaker, though its literal meaning is closer to pulling the branch of a tree. Looking back, the name feels fitting, because Nelson would spend his whole life pulling at the roots of injustice. He grew up in the rolling hills of the Eastern Cape. His father served as a local chief and as a trusted counselor to Thembu royalty. Young Nelson lived simply, herding cattle, playing with other children, and sitting by the fire at night, listening to elders tell stories of African kings and warriors who had fought for their people. When Nelson was around 9 years old, his father died. Everything changed. He was taken in by Jongintaba Dalindyebo, the regent who governed the Thembu people at the time, and Nelson went to live in the royal household. There he watched how leaders truly led. He saw them listen before they spoke. He learned early on that real leadership means serving your people, not ruling over them. At school, a teacher gave him an English name, Nelson. In those days, Black South African children were routinely given English names, a small but telling sign of a system built to treat European customs as superior to African ones. But young Nelson was curious. He read, he questioned, and slowly he began to see just how unequal his country truly was. White South Africans held the land, the power, and the freedom. Black South Africans, the overwhelming majority, held almost none of it. They couldn't vote. They couldn't choose where to live. In many places, they couldn't even walk certain streets. This system had a name, Apartheid, an Afrikaans word meaning apartness. It was a body of law that divided people strictly by race, concentrating power in white hands while stripping rights from black, colored, and Indian South Africans. Mandela went on to study at the University of Fort Hare, at the time the only institution of higher learning open to black students in South Africa. There he met other young people questioning the system and talking for the first time about real change. But his time at Fort Hare ended early. He was expelled after joining a student protest. Back in the royal household, his guardian arranged a marriage for him. Nelson didn't want it, so he made a bold choice. He left for Johannesburg, South Africa's largest city. Johannesburg was loud, fast, and alive, and it exposed him to apartheid in its rawest form. He worked odd jobs, completed his university degree by correspondence, and began studying law. It was here that his real political journey began, because in Johannesburg he met people who weren't just talking about change, they were organizing for it. In 1944, at 26 years old, Mandela joined the African National Congress, known as the ANC. Back then, the ANC's approach was cautious. Petitions, letters, polite requests for reform. Mandela and a group of younger members wanted more. They founded the ANC Youth League, pushing for boycotts, strikes, and direct action. He trained as a lawyer and opened a practice with his close friend and fellow activist Oliver Tambo, defending black South Africans charged under apartheid's unjust laws. Every day brought new evidence of the system's cruelty. People jailed for not carrying required passes, families torn apart, entire communities forcibly removed from land the government wanted for white residents. In 1948, things grew worse. A new government took power and hardened apartheid further, banning interracial marriage and segregating schools, hospitals, beaches, and public buildings. The ANC responded. In 1952, they launched the Defiance Campaign, a mass, deliberate, and nonviolent campaign of civil disobedience. Thousands entered whites-only spaces and refused to carry their passes, accepting arrest rather than compliance. Mandela traveled the country, organizing and speaking. He became a household name, a hero to many, a troublemaker to the government, which responded by banning him from public gatherings and restricting his movements. He didn't stop. He had seen too much suffering to stop. In 1955, the ANC and its allies adopted the Freedom Charter, a founding statement of the movement's vision, opening with the declaration that South Africa belonged to all who lived in it, black and white alike. It called for universal suffrage, equal rights, and a fairer share of the country's land and resources. The state's response was severe. In 1956, 156 activists, Mandela among them, were arrested and charged with treason. The trial dragged on for 5 years and ended finally in acquittal for every defendant. But during those same years, tragedy struck. In 1960, in the township of Sharpeville, police opened fire on a crowd of peaceful demonstrators, killing 69 people, including women and children. The Sharpeville massacre shocked the world, and it changed Mandela's own thinking. For years, the ANC had drawn on the nonviolent philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, but Mandela concluded that peaceful protest alone could not move a government willing to answer it with gunfire. So, in 1961, he helped found Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the ANC. Its early campaign targeted infrastructure and government installations, deliberately avoiding civilian casualties, aiming to demonstrate that the resistance would fight back. Mandela understood the risk. He later explained that they had chosen to answer the government's violence with a controlled, targeted violence of their own, a last resort, not a first instinct. He went underground, moving in disguise from safe house to safe house, so elusive that the press nicknamed him the Black Pimpernel. He even slipped out of the country to seek military training and support from other African nations. In 1962, after 17 months in hiding, he was arrested, betrayed, most accounts say, by an informant, and sentenced to 5 years for incitement and leaving the country illegally. Then, in 1963, while he was already imprisoned, police raided the movement's secret headquarters at a farm in Rivonia, uncovering documents that implicated Mandela and several other leaders in a broader sabotage campaign. They were charged anew, this time with capital crimes that could carry the death penalty. It became known as the Rivonia trial, and the world watched to see whether these men would be executed. On April 20th, 1964, Mandela addressed the court directly, in a statement lasting several hours, laying out the reasoning behind the armed struggle and the daily indignities of apartheid. He closed with words that would echo for decades. describing the ideal of a free democratic society where all people live together in harmony, an ideal he hoped to live for, but was prepared to die for if he had to. The courtroom fell silent. Many expected a death sentence. Instead, on June 12, 1964, Mandela and his co-defendants were sentenced to life imprisonment. The next day, he was transferred to Robben Island, a prison off the coast of Cape Town. It would be his home for 18 years. Conditions were harsh: thin mats on concrete floors, meager rations, and forced labor breaking limestone in a blinding white quarry. Work that permanently damaged the eyesight of many prisoners, Mandela included. Yet he refused to be broken. He turned imprisonment into an education, studying constantly and encouraging fellow prisoners to do the same. So much so that Robben Island earned an unofficial nickname, Mandela University. He even studied Afrikaans, the language of his jailers, believing that understanding your opponent was itself a form of strength. Treating guards with basic respect, he slowly won a grudging respect in return, and, in some cases, planted the first seeds of doubt about apartheid itself in the minds of the men guarding him. Authorities periodically offered him conditional release if he renounced armed struggle. He refused every time, insisting he would accept freedom only once it was extended to all South Africans. Outside, a global movement grew around his name. Musicians boycotted South African stages. Nations imposed economic sanctions. Free Nelson Mandela became an international rallying cry. Inside, his contact with the world was tightly rationed. One letter every 6 months, capped at 500 words, and one 30-minute visit every 6 months. His wife at the time, Winnie Mandela, faced her own harassment and imprisonment. His mother died, and he was denied permission to attend her funeral. His eldest son died in a car accident, and again he was barred from attending. Through all of it, he held to one resolve. When he was finally free, he would not seek revenge. He would seek reconciliation. In 1982, after 18 years on Robben Island, he was moved to Pollsmoor Prison on the mainland, and in 1988 to Victor Verster Prison, where conditions eased further. By then, apartheid itself was buckling, battered by international sanctions and mounting unrest at home. The government understood it could no longer hold the line, and that any path forward ran through Nelson Mandela. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk became president and opened secret talks with Mandela about a peaceful transition. And on February 11th, 1990, after 27 years behind bars, Nelson Mandela walked free, 71 years old, fist raised, to a crowd that had waited a lifetime to see him. In his first speech as a free man, he made his priorities clear. The struggle for equal rights, he said, was not yet finished. The 4 years that followed were tense and often violent, as extremists on multiple sides tried to derail the negotiations. But Mandela kept traveling, kept speaking, kept working to hold the peace together, even reaching out to former adversaries, including the widow of Hendrik Verwoerd, one of apartheid's chief architects. He later explained his reasoning simply: to make peace with an enemy, you have to work with that enemy. And in doing so, he becomes your partner. In 1993, Mandela and de Klerk jointly received the Nobel Peace Prize for dismantling apartheid without plunging the country into civil war. Then, on April 27, 1994, South Africa held its first fully democratic election. Millions of black South Africans voted for the first time in their lives, some standing in line for hours. The ANC won, And on May 10th, 1994, Nelson Mandela was sworn in as South Africa's first black president. The challenges of governing a deeply wounded, divided nation were immense. To help the country confront its past without collapsing into a cycle of revenge, Mandela established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a forum where victims of apartheid-era abuses could testify and perpetrators could confess in exchange for amnesty. It was often painful and it was imperfect, but it gave South Africa a way to face its history honestly rather than bury it. Mandela served a single term from 1994 to 1999, then stepped down deliberately, a choice meant to show that South African democracy rested on its institutions, not on any one leader. After leaving office, he remained an active global voice, campaigning against HIV/AIDS and for children's education, and became a worldwide symbol of dignity, reconciliation, and moral courage. Nelson Mandela died on December 5, 2013, at the age of 95. Leaders and ordinary citizens across the globe mourned him. He was laid to rest in Kunu, the Eastern Cape village where his life had begun. Nelson Mandela's life is proof that one person's convictions can reshape a nation, that justice and humanity don't have to be opposites, and that forgiveness can be the harder, stronger choice, not the weaker one. As he once put it, it always seems impossible until it's done. So, my friends, that is the story of Nelson Mandela, a boy from a small village who became a freedom fighter, spent 27 years in prison, and rose to lead his nation. A man who chose forgiveness over revenge and changed the world because of it. I hope this story moved you. If it did, please like this video and subscribe to Storyline Chapters for more. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me which part of Mandela's story struck you the most, or just leave one word describing how it made you feel. Thank you for listening, my friends. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep believing that change is possible.